fucking detour. If I'd have known this, I would have just went a whole different direction, a whole different way. I would have just stayed on 75 to 33 to 29 to 67. I have never been this way. then my ass is going to take 27 up to 67, take 67 to 29, 29 into St. Mary's, and then 29 to 33, 33 to 75 South. That's the way I should have came in. I knew that. It's bullshit. Running into heavy patches of ball.
Continue on this road for 2.6 miles. Speed warning. left on West County Road 400, north, IN1.
Yeah, this is all new to me. I hate fucking detours.
In a half mile, turn right on North County Road 900, west, IN1.
I slowly backtracked as
In a quarter mile, turn right to stay on Indiana.
wrong. Suggested I run, but I was frozen to the ground, unable to move. I stood transfixed, as if bound by an invisible force. Every instinct in me railed to take a step back, to leave, to run. I waited there for a moment. Neither of us moved until I started retreating back. I ended up walking the rest of the way to the motel, constantly looking over my shoulder for the strange creature. My heart was still pounding hours later. A part of me knew it wasn't the last I was going to see of it. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty. I found myself constantly glancing around, my senses perpetually on edge. Every shadow seemed to conceal that figure I had seen, yet I saw nothing out of the ordinary for some time. But that was all about to change. During one of my interviews with the local group of UFO enthusiasts,
Goddamn cameras
Nick and
backwards.
Lita, something caught my attention outside the window. I paused mid-sentence and ran over to the window. There, by the edge of the thick scrubland, was a flash of movement. I excused myself promptly, curiosity pushing uncertainty aside as I headed towards the source. As I neared closer, what I saw made my blood turn cold. I stood gazing at a towering figure bathed in the half-light of the setting sun. It was entirely covered in scales, like a snake or a lizard. My breath hitched as its yellow eyes met mine. It had an uncanny dinosaur-like head, but its body was more humanoid. It might have been my hysteria talking, but there was more than hostility in its posture. Curiosity, perhaps? Understanding, even? As if an unseen accord passed between us, I took a step forward towards it. It did not retreat. The creature, as horrifying as it was, appeared to be sentient. While I stood there, lost in a silent exchange with God knows what, my phone buzzed. Startled, I looked away for a second. By the time I looked up, the creature, or alien, or whatever, had vanished. I searched the scrubland, but there were no tracks, no signs of a struggle, nothing. It was as if it had evaporated into thin air.
Speed warning.
The only fact I had to prove its existence was my memory, as unreliable as it can be. I was left questioning everything, my own sanity above all. I knew I had seen something extraordinary out there, and yet, in the warmth of the morning sun, it felt absurd, even to me. When I shared the incident with Nick and Lita, they didn't throw incredulous glances my way as I thought they would. Instead, They nodded in understanding.
I love all
Through
the
them,
true stories
I
he
learned of
tells.
others who had similar encounters with this thing. More than you would think.
What the fuck was that?
It's not the skies in Roswell that you have to watch out
Something just hit
for.
my truck.
There are strange beasts that live on the ground level with you and me. Nobody knows what they want, but you better keep your head about you when you're out there in the desert. You never know what you're going to find. I'd like to share an experience from about 5 years ago. It was back in the summer of 2016, and it was a day I'll never forget. I found myself standing in front of the notorious Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Kentucky. The number of horror stories
In
attached to that
1.5
place is enough to make
miles,
your
turn right
skin
on
crawl.
East Vine Street.
But I had it in
IN
mind that I was
67.
cut from a
Credit to
different cloth.
Jonathan Gregg.
Exploring abandoned buildings had
He's
become a bit of a
awesome. Check his
pastime
channel
for
out.
me, especially ones that accompanied a good ghost story. But this one was different. I had a personal stake. My grandmother had worked there as a nurse before the place was shut down, and I just had to see it for myself. I remember it well.
Coming
My
into
journey
Red
began on a hot afternoon.
Speed limit
It was one of
reduced
those
ahead.
days that's just so hot, your clothes stick to you. The first step inside the sanatorium felt like stepping into a different time. Dry leaves filled the halls and birds had taken up roost in the ceilings and
Speed
windowsills.
warning.
The silence in the building was a character of its own. It was this ever-present thing that seemed to follow me around from room to room. This place was once a critical haven during the TB epidemic, but now it was decrepit and decaying in solitude. Walking through the deserted halls, I could almost see the hustle of patients and doctors that once filled this building. The worn-out walls, the faded wallpapers, and the stained tiles had seen so much life and death. If only this place could talk, I thought to myself. I continued on my walk. After a while, I found a room filled with old, discarded medical equipment. The rusted bed frames, dilapidated wheelchairs, and broken bottles seemed to desperately hold on to their purpose. I remember distinctly standing in front of an old drained hydrotherapy tub. I had heard tales of these tubs from Grandma, about how they were filled with ice-cold water to reduce the patient's high temperature. And then, the weirdest thing happened. As I stretched my hand to touch the tub's corroded surface, I felt a sudden chill. The room was still hot, but I felt the hair on my arms stand on end. I shook it off, blaming my nerves for running wild in such an intimidating place. But as I delved further into the building, the temperature kept dropping. I kept hearing these distant sounds. They were hard to make out at first, but started becoming more
In
clear
a quarter mile,
as I ventured
turn right
deeper
on
into the
East
building.
Vine Street.
At one
IN
point, I was
67.
sure
In 1,000 feet, turn
In
right onto
0.2
Indiana
miles, turn
67
right
North
on
East Vine Street.
IN 67.
decided to investigate the noise. I followed
Speed
the
warning.
crying through the corridor,
Left curve ahead.
pausing every now and then to make sure I was going in the right direction. All of a sudden, a calming scent filled the room. It was a perfume of
Turn right onto Indiana 67 North East Vine Street.
so out of place here. It was like something my grandmother would wear. I was beginning to fear that I wasn't alone in this rundown building. I continued towards the source of the crying, but every time I took a step forward, the sound seemed to move a step back.
Continue on Indiana 67 North for 9 miles.
And that's how I'm going out of here.
Feeling, I moved towards one of the small rooms that were used as patient quarters. I stepped inside and the crying echoed louder in the hollow space. Hesitantly, I slowly turned my flashlight towards the room. The beam cut through the darkness. At first I couldn't see clearly because of the dust particles in the air, but once they settled, I saw something absolutely horrifying. My flashlight landed on a small figure huddled in the middle of the room. My blood ran cold when I realized what it was. In front of me was a translucent figure of a little girl. She wasn't real like you and me, but she was there, and her crying was as real as it gets. She wore a faded gown that hung loosely on her thin frame. Her eyes were hollow and infinitely sad. She twisted her hands together as she whimpered softly. "Hello," I called out hesitantly. As soon as the words left my mouth, she looked up, finally noticing my presence. Her hands flew up to wipe her eyes. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out, and only a low moan filled the room. My legs felt like lead, but I took a step towards her. Can you hear me?" I asked again. This time she nodded. The next moments were a blur of fear and adrenaline. I tried asking questions, but her mute nods and head shakes were the only answers I had. I asked if she was alone, if she needed help. At this, she merely lowered her head, the sadness in her eyes deepening, and then she vanished. She was just, all of a sudden, gone. I stood there stunned for I don't know how long. When I finally came to my senses, I was alone again. No signs of the ghost girl or any other apparitions. I returned home, unable to shake off the encounter from my mind. Was that little girl indeed a ghost? What happened to her? And how long has she been trapped in that place? I've heard tales of ghosts and spirits, but this was more real and more frightening than any of the stories I had come across. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still feel a ghostly presence around. The desperation in her hollow eyes still haunts me. Part of me wishes I could have helped her, or done something to ease her suffering. But the other part knows full well that there are some things you don't mess around with in this world, and the spirit world is one of them. I guess you could say I'm a bit of a loner type. Always preferred quiet and solitude over noise and people. That's why I took off up to the Canadian Rockies for my latest adventure. I set out one spring morning, intent on immersing myself in the great outdoors for a week or so, maybe more. I didn't have any solid plans. I just figured I would go the road trail along the outer British Columbia border. Couple of days until I stumbled upon an isolated spot nestled amidst a section of towering pines, overlooking a beautiful glacial-fed lake. It was one of those places you'd think only exists on postcards, but there I was, standing right in front of it. I found a spot of flat ground to pitch my tent, right in front of the lake. I was looking forward to waking up to that view. The walk was well worth it in my opinion. The trail to get there was rough, and after dragging my bones through the wilderness all day, I was eager to set up camp and just enjoy the place. Once the tent was up, I set about gathering wood for a fire and rocks to create a ring to house the blaze. Once everything was set, I nestled up by the fire, munching away at some canned beans. The crackling of the flame was the only sound echoing in the tranquil forest. Soon I was in my sleeping bag, cozy as could be in my two-man tent. I was just on the edge of drifting into that blissful sleep when I heard it. It was faint at first. I thought it could be the wind or rustling of the trees, but then it grew louder, a repetitive, heavy thud, like something was knocking powerfully on wood. Being quite far out from other campers, it was unnerving to say the least. I'd experienced various nocturnal sounds on my past trips, but this was different. This felt calculated, intentional almost. It sent a chill down my spine. I burrowed deeper into my sleeping bag, pulling the fabric right up to my eyes, straining my ears to make sense of the sounds. Shaking off the initial traces of fear, I reminded myself I was in the wild. There are all sorts of creatures out here with me, and most of them harmless. But the sounds didn't stop there. A low whooping sound echoed through the night. It wasn't any animal I knew. I was sure I heard something moving around outside my tent, as if I was being circled. I knew I was in trouble then. Prey animals don't circle around things. That's only something a predator would do, and only when it was on the hunt. Something in the air changed. It became dense, almost suffocating. A new smell, something rancid and off-putting, began to permeate the tent. There was an undercurrent of something tangy and rotten. It was so strong I couldn't help but silently gag. My heartbeat pounded in my ears like a drum, every nerve in my body prickling with fear. Then, and I swear to you on everything I love, something shuffled past my tent. It was right outside. I hesitated for a moment and then finally, real slow-like, I cracked the zipper on the tent. It was nearly pitch black outside with the only light coming from the low embers of the fire. Rummaging through my backpack, I found my flashlight. There, barely 15 feet away from my tent, was the creature. This was no bear or any other creature I'd ever seen. Thick, curly fur. Its arms hung down its sides, ending in long, gnarled fingers. The flashlight beam moved upwards, and I took in the details of its face. Similar to man's, but unmistakably wild and different. Deep jaw with a prominent. When I returned to civilization, I scoured the internet for answers. The descriptions matched creatures it could have been. The location seemed plausible. But honestly, I don't know who would believe me. It has left me with an unquenchable curiosity, a
In
connection
half a mile, turn right onto West Tyson Road.
that changed how I see the wild, how I see myself. The Rockies somehow seem even bigger now, and full of hidden secrets. So, that's my story. Crazy as it may seem, it's the most real thing I've ever experienced. I remember the night.
Turn right onto West Tyson Road.
2 years back in the dead of summer, and I was in Michigan visiting a few friends around Lake Superior. The whole day had been filled with great food, laughter, and the best company. I really fell in love with the place. Those
Continue on West Tyson Road for 3/4 of a mile.
look across the water, and you won't see any sign of land at all. It's hard to describe unless you've been there and seen it for yourself. Those waters are absolutely colossal. We were all still on the beach when night fell around us. We were so entranced in conversation that we either didn't care or didn't notice. There's something otherworldly about Lake Superior at night, with the moonlight reflecting off its surface, and the way they gently lap against the shoreline. We had a bonfire going, and we showed no signs of. The moment I touched the water, I was shaking but submerged myself. Or maybe the shock was just wearing off. The water was still, and I could see the moon's silvery.
Take the next right, then turn left.
I was lost in this serene beauty, oblivious to the world around me. I swam out a ways from the beach, and suddenly I was overcome by a weird sensation of being watched. I looked around, but I couldn't see much of anything in the dark. I tried to shrug it off and continue my swim, but it wouldn't leave me alone. With my heart beginning to beat audibly faster, I decided to shore. Maybe it was just the cold getting to me, or maybe it was something else. However, just as I was about to turn around, I heard something that froze me in place. A snarl, like a dog, echoed off the water's surface. I circled around in place, trying to find the source of the noise, but I couldn't see anything. It was so pungent it made my eyes water. The sudden intensity was unbearable. I knew something strange was nearby, towards the smell. In the distance, on the shoreline, I could make out a dark silhouette. It was huge and human-like in form. Even in the dim lighting, I could tell that it was but as I squinted to see better, it was on 4 legs now. I didn't know better, but we'll look at it. But on this particular day, everything went sideways. Sure, does its best to catch you off guard, and that's precisely what happened to me. As I got deeper into the trail, I accidentally wandered off the marked path. At first, I wasn't all that worried. As I said, I'm an experienced hiker. I figured I would just retrace my steps. But as I started back, nothing looked familiar anymore. The trees started to close in, and the tweet of birds started to fade, as if they were swallowed up by the dense wilderness. That's when my heart started pounding. Suddenly, the serene woods seemed ominous. It wasn't supposed to be like this. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to brush it off and focus on making my way back to the trail. The tranquility I had once admired now felt like a dreadful silence. I couldn't quell the fluttering feeling of unease, creeping in the pit of my stomach. I tried to remind myself of all those survival shows I used to binge watch, the tips and tricks I had gathered over the years. I kept walking, but with growing apprehension. As I continued in what I thought was the direction back, I heard something. At first, I thought it was the rustling leaves or some harmless critter, but then I heard it again. It was a sound unlike any I had heard before in a forest. It was a strange clicking sound. I froze in my tracks, straining my ears, hoping I had imagined it. But there it was again, only it was louder and much closer this time. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, goosebumps pricking my skin. I had no idea what was making that noise, and my imagination began painting terrifying scenarios in my head. I noticed a strange path in front of me. It descended into a heavily veiled, hidden part of the forest. I approached the entrance and noticed it was wide enough for me to pass through. Not completely without fear, I cautiously moved forward, clutching my small pocket knife. I didn't know it then, but I was about to experience the most terrifying encounter of my life. Suddenly, right in front of me, there was a grotesque figure. It looked human in a way, but there was something terribly wrong with it. The creature, about 6 feet tall, darted around like some ravaged wild animal. It was completely naked and so ghastly looking that it took all my strength not to scream. Its body was gone and sickly pale. Its skin was so white that it seemed to glow. Its hideous face featured two enormous black eyes that lacked any and all expression. The creature had a gaping open mouth and was making a teeth-chattering rhythmic clicking sound. Terrified, I scurried away, only for the creature to bolt after me, moving on all fours at unnerving speed. With me trying to lose myself in the winding paths of the forest, the creature chased barely a stride
All right, guys,
behind.
we're gonna go drop our
At
trailer.
some point, in my panic, I realized the creature was not attacked. It was almost as if it was hurting me, showing me a path away from its den and through the
Oh
dense
my God, I'm
forest.
so tired
The
of shit
horrifying
like
figure
today
kept a
and
distressing
yesterday and last
proximity,
week.
but didn't invade my space more than that. Despite every natural instinct telling me to flee from the predatory figure trailing behind me, this bizarre direction it was offering seemed to be taking me back to civilization. I followed the strange path that led away from the nightmare behind me. After a moment, I eventually caught sight of the familiar Appalachian Trail. Relief washed
I was
over
just
me.
on the
I
Appalachian
can't even
Trail
begin
not
to
long
describe
ago.
how amazing I felt to be out of there. The creature followed me all the way to the forest edge. I imagine it could have caught me if it wanted to.
I need to go look at the
And
video.
yet, here I was. As I slumped to the ground, panting with exhaustion, and still shaken by the encounter, my mind raced through what just happened. Later, sitting in the comforting warmth of my living room, far away from the mountains of Appalachia, I began piecing together my encounter. I was left raw and endlessly grateful for the escape, but deeply unsettled by the whole thing. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see that pale figure darting around the forest floor. My perspective on hiking has been forever altered, and my curiosity for the unknown has just about died. Nowadays, when I find myself hiking and camping, I never stray too far from the beaten path. That creature certainly isn't something I'd like to see again, and I'm afraid I might just run into it again if I ventured too far into the wild. And if I did, would I be as lucky then? Or would the creature hunt me down in earnest? I'm incredibly curious if anyone else has encountered these creatures and possibly know what they want from us.
Oh, good Lord, it's one of these days. I just want to get to Hebron. I need the weekend badly. I need to go make some videos and relax. Go find some goats.
Your destination is on.
whoever dropped the trailer didn't do the fucking landing gear, right? I can't get the handle down to crank the gear out. See, it's things like this we got to deal with. It's always a pain in the ass. Whoever dropped the trailer, which I blame the yard guys, the handle crank, they didn't hang it right, and it's jammed up in there. You cannot get it out. So you have to lift it up with the yard dog so I can get the handle out. Back out underneath and lift the trailer up. It's got hydraulics. That quick it came out. Now I gotta get back in my truck. Hook up to my trailer and finally might be on my way to Hebron, Kentucky. Finally, maybe. I'm telling you guys, sometimes you guys don't know the half of it when it comes to driving a truck. The bullshit you gotta put up with. Watch how dirty my hands get. I didn't put my damn gloves on like an idiot. I just want to get the hell on the road. Get this fucking day over and get the weekend started. Oh my God. Yeah, somebody had it cranked way too high. Way, way too high. Pretty cool here though how they got laser lights. At least it's got a little bit of fuel in it. I always want to crank it up as far as it goes. And always hang it back in its hanger, the handle. Always. Ava Wright, I don't know what all those emojis are. Appreciate it though. Now they ain't got the tandem all the way back and pulled out without hitting anything. Mother taking guys with me again. I'll put the seal on it at the guard shack. That's how you're supposed to do it, Chris. Not kidding, guys. I'm going to live stream every night I work in October. And yeah, the tandems do need slid. Always check the top to make sure it's latched. Now we got to go build up enough air to slide the tandems. It's just the thing with Cavalier trailers, I think. They ain't got clear like the pins won't fold. Let's check there. I done tells you right there that trailer used to be air slide.
this way to camp. So we're going to camp. We spent the day looking at the touristy stuff, the boardwalk to the windows, and the door trail, just to name it. My buddies were all excited about the camping party. I was not so much. I did enjoy sleeping in tents, but it wasn't long before we made camp near Watchdog Butte. Night quickly fell. We were all sitting around. The full moon was shining, and the clouds had basically disappeared. The sky was beautiful and made the camping part of the trip worth it. I still wasn't overly excited, but I was coming around fairly quick. We could hear the wildlife starting to emerge. The coyotes were yipping and howling. We could hear small things scurrying around, but we just kept talking and enjoying each other's company, going over where we wanted to start out our next day before we crawled into our sleeping bags. At least, that was our plan. We didn't know that where we chose to sleep was the home to something unnatural. We were laughing and cracking jokes when we first heard it. A scream. At first we thought it was a mountain lion, but it sounded eerily wrong. We couldn't quite figure out why, but we immediately fell silent and began looking around, trying to find the source. We just started to calm down and make some jokes about how antsy we were, when my friend grabbed my leg and went completely silent. I looked at them and saw that they were staring off towards the watchdog. As their face turned white, I turned to follow their sight, and standing there at the feet of the watchdog was a woman. She was there, but she was blue and see-through. She was gorgeous. As the rest of the group caught on and turned to look, her features started to change. She raised her arm. Her eyes became just gaping black holes, and her mouth dropped open. That wasn't even the most terrifying part. The scream that she released made my blood run cold. I quickly grabbed my ears and scrambled as far back as I could. I watched as I saw my friends all cover their ears also. We had no idea what was going on, but as soon as that screaming stopped, we were tripping over each other trying to get back to the car. Before we could gather our things, we heard something just outside of camp. I didn't wait to figure out if she had gotten any closer. My ears couldn't handle another scream like the one she had just assaulted us with. We raced to gather what we could and threw it into the back of our cars. Not caring about how we were mixing up tent poles, we just wanted out of there immediately. It was as we were finishing loading the last bit up that we heard it. Faint music coming from just outside where we had made camp. We all looked at one another, unsure of what to think about this new development. Was it something to do with the being we had already seen? Was it something else? Was it another camper? I knew that I didn't want to stay and hang out and figure out what it was, so I jumped in my car and turned the key. Everyone had piled into whichever car had an open seat, and we sped out of there. As we neared town, we slowed down. I was leading the convoy, and I didn't want any of us to get a ticket for speeding. I know that I was thinking that surely someone had been playing a trick on us, but we didn't even know anyone, and surely it would be bad for business to scare the tourists. We found a hotel and got a few rooms, but we all filed into one room. None of us wanted to be separated. The events of the night had left
Come on, man. Come on.
us shaken and pretty terrified. We all just kind of fell where we stood, making up where
I even got ghost stories playing on it.
to sit so we could all stay together. It's been years. I haven't ever been back to the Badlands. I don't think that I ever will. What I do know is that when my friends and I get together, we rarely speak of it, and only do so to ensure that we're not crazy, that it really happened. I know that it sounds crazy. I really do. What we went through that night can cause a grown man to pee his pants. I've always considered myself a daredevil, the friend in the group always willing to take a risk, from bungee jumping off of bridges to finally being able to skydive after my 18th birthday 2 months ago. I have a taste for adrenaline at all times. So when my friends and I scheduled a camping trip over spring break, wanting to be unplugged for a couple days from reality, there was no fear in my heart about it. Not yet, anyway. California has been my home for as long as I can remember. My family immigrated here from Mexico when I was 4 years old. El Dorado Hills is the closest thing to home I have ever known, and molded me into who I am today. But I never did much traveling besides visiting the grandparents in Mexico yearly. So when my friend and I scheduled a vacation, I was more than excited. Even though it was only an hour away, I couldn't wait to get to the National Forest. So excited, I started packing weeks early and preparing myself mentally for the separation from my best friend for a couple days, my phone. I even bought rods and lures to fish with, despite never having caught a fish in my life. I thought that this trip would be the perfect time to try, plus two of my friends knew how. We also planned to hike trails and ride our bike not fast enough. But my first trip away from my parents was killing, apparently, because they wouldn't stop talking about it, trying to scare me into changing my mind. In hindsight, they had every right to be worried. The drive to the campground was exhilarating. The landscape was so vibrant, clearly untouched by humans. The area was mountainous with lakes and trees and open areas scattered throughout the landscape. I know I said I'm a daredevil, but at this point I began to think I underestimated the size of this forest and my ability to maneuver it. But of course, I didn't tell my friends that. I was the brave one. If I was uneasy, it would rub off on everyone else. So I ignored the rising fear of what or who could be in the forest at night that we could. But the park was so big, our sights were spread out. We finally made it to our designated area and started setting up the tent so we could explore a little bit before dusk. Had we not been able to hear faded music and laughter from other people, I would have assumed that we were alone. Our swimsuits were already under our clothes, so we grabbed
You don't think I'll get in trouble for stringing that Donaldson dread on there, do you? I do that though, I can't keep my